Hello and welcome back to the basement. In this episode, we are going to finish up the neck on my first scratch-built bass guitar. Let's get after it.
So you can probably see these on camera. These two frets are crooked. They slant, actually three. It looks like all of them. It's like they're all kind of biasing that way. Yeah, that one's not square at all. Now you can really see it. Most of my frets are off. Ugh. Try and make myself feel a little bit better. Other than the crooked frets, how does she look? Is this color scheme gonna work?
All right, I'm back. It is the next evening, and as you saw in the previous footage, I've got some crooked fret slots. And man, shout out to the Facebook community that I'm a part of with the different amateur luthiers groups, because there definitely no shortage of opinions on how to deal with this, and got some mixed feedback. Some saying to pull the fretboard and start over, but the vast majority of them were saying, hey, it's your first build, give yourself some grace. And to that I would agree with, and I may still end up having to pull this fretboard and start over, but there's no harm in at least trying to salvage it at this point. Worst thing that could happen is it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, then I go to plan B, which is make a new fretboard. Unfortunately, this is the only fretboard material I have that's like this, that matches the stringers in the neck. So that was a design feature that I wanted, or at least that I was really excited about incorporating. But I've got something that's resembling a bass guitar. I'm excited about the shape. I'm excited about the weight because it's not that heavy, and I've still got a ton. I haven't carved the neck, so I've got a ton. I haven't carved the body yet either, so there's going to be a ton of weight that's coming off of this. I would imagine at least equal to the hardware that I'm putting on. So I'm excited about that. So if it stays the same weight, I think I'm in good shape. I haven't weighed this, but if I had to hazard a guess, this is probably about 8 pounds, somewhere in there. The body is actually really, really light. I'd say it probably is neck heavy at this point, but then again, I haven't carved the neck, and I'm using Hipshot Ultralight USA tuners, so I don't think it's going to have neck dive. Plus, I've got a nice big high mass Hipshot bridge to go with it. I forget what model it is. It's not the kick-ass bridge. It's something different. I wanted to try something different on this build that incorporates string through body. So, at any rate, the move now is to try and correct these crooked fret slots.
All right, for probably the third time, I'm taking apart this ESP base that I'm using to model my neck after. I'm using it just to model the dimensions, and particularly the 6-bolt neck joint as well. So again, I'm just verifying that I got at least the first and the last fret and the nut slot aligned correctly, and I'm just going back to the square and seeing how off they are. Then I'm creating some sanding dust out of some offcuts of the actual fretboard, and I'm mixing that with 30-minute epoxy as my attempt to fill these jacked up fret slots and then recut them. So I've not tried this before, and I found that it's problematic. It's a little bit more flexible than wood even after it's cured. So that became an issue, which you'll see coming up here in a minute. But first, I need to break out the radius blocks and get this thing back down to where it needs to be. I believe this was a 10-inch radius, if memory serves correct. And there I'm just making sure that it's perfectly flat. And it is. And I'm using a card scraper on the edges of the fretboard to get that nice and smooth. Now I'm transferring the fret markers over again. And then I start redrawing the lines for the fret slots. So again, I'm using a center finding protractor that has a right angle at 0 and I'm using that to align over the center line on the fretboard, and that's how I'm getting perpendicular frets to the fretboard. So I'm checking as I go just to make sure I get this right. And they're certainly straighter. The problems I end up having is, like I said before, trying to get a saw to not follow the pre-existing cut and not fall into the existing groove where the 30-minute epoxy and sawdust was. That was a challenge. And then a ton of hours of work to get the frets to actually stick. So if I had it to do over again, I think this was still a good learning experience, but I don't think this instrument will be able to be refretted without having to go through this exact same process all over again. So if I ever do need to replace these frets, I'm going to have to fill them with epoxy and sawdust again, and then do all the crap that I'm getting ready to do right now to get the frets to stick. It could be just I have crappy hammering technique again. I've never hammered frets into a clean fret slot with virgin wood. It's always either been a refret job, or in this case, a less than ideal substrate to hammer the frets into. So it could just be my technique, or it could just be the crappy materials I'm using. But nevertheless, these frets did not want to stick. I have my theories on that. I may not have gotten the right saw curve to match the fret tangs. The epoxy may have been more springy and givey and not wanting to lock the frets into place, because I was resawing into some of that. But nevertheless, they didn't want to stick, so I had to resort to CA gluing them in place. Not ideal. So this took quite a bit of time. I'm not going to bore you with showing you all that, so we're going to skip ahead. The real fun part was, so obviously when you're working with CA glue and accelerator, you're speeding the process up, so you have very little open time. As soon as you spray that, accelerator on there, it creates a chemical reaction to fuse it within seconds, which is both good and bad. Yes, I super glued my fingers together multiple times. That was fun. But the real pain in the butt is sometimes it creates a violent exothermic reaction, which is hot, and that causes the liquid to kind of bubble out as it's hardening, which creates a big mess. And that was a lot of extra work to clean it up. It remains to be seen if this is, as much work as making a new fretboard would be. Again, with the block inlays in place, the jury is out, and there's no guarantee that I would have been able to get this thing cleanly off, especially with it being only on for about a week or two at this time. So this is the tedious part. It's just gluing the frets in and then cleaning up the excess with razor blades. This sucked. I'm not going to lie. This was just loads of not fun. And then, I would see that some of the frets didn't get seated all the way, so I had to kind of gap fill a little bit and try and clamp them in, and then, it was not fun. I'm definitely going to get an arbor press and one of those cauls to press in frets, I think, for my next build. I still want to try doing it this way again, but on a better fretboard where I didn't screw up and have to repair the fret slots. I think the frets would have stuck better had I not had to do what I did. But this was a good learning experience. I learned that I don't want to do this part again. I'll do it if I have to, but I'll learn to better processes to avoid having to do this again. So think there's probably something to be said for cutting the fret slots after you've radiused the fretboard, because I think that's where they were straight. They were straight before I had to resaw them. So when I cut them into the flat fretboard, they were straight. Then as soon as I radiused it and then tried to sink the kerf back into the radius where I sawed the kerf away, that's where things got screwed up. So, yeah.
So this is all going to come off before I start the faceting process. That's the final neck thickness at the highest point of the radius. It's a pretty thin neck. So which means I will start faceting by going about halfway between, I guess. And I'm wondering if I should go ahead and put my fret markers in. If they would go, I think I'm going to do them right where the fretboard meets the neck. That's what I'm thinking. Anyway. Let's get this thing together, man. This is exciting. Frets are in. Yeehaw.
All right, so this is a stressful cut. This is the best method to kick it off. I could do it by hand with a rasp, but getting this much material off, it would not be fun doing it by hand. So the bandsaw is the way to go. I was just having problems with my bandsaw with the blade coming off the tires, but I did get it done.
Well, that was scary and interesting. I do need new bandsaw tires. I've been trying to get new bandsaw tires. I've tried 2 times unsuccessfully finding the right ones that were wide enough to do what I needed them to do. So, or thick enough rather. Because the ones I've got off of Amazon and even from Woodcraft are too thin to get sufficient tension on the blade, or at least the resaw blade anyway. All right. I suppose it's time to start carving this neck. First, I got to figure out a good way to hold it. Have been working on the pick guard a little bit off camera. I haven't done much. I've just filled in some of the gaps and holes, perforations on the back side. I got to sand those flat and then flip it over and do the front. I'm not using tabletop epoxy, which is what I typically would use for something like this. I'm using 30-minute epoxy. So we'll see how well that works. All right, so I think this is the move. I've got a 2x4 of some cool figured poplar in my vise, and then I've got my neck clamped to the vise, or clamped to the piece of poplar that's in the vise. So I think that'll give me enough angle to do what I need to do. But first, I got to reestablish the center line, and I'm going to use a Shinto saw rasp and a couple other rasps and files to basically facet the neck. That's going to be my method, and we'll kind of go from there. So first things first, I'm going to grab my protractor and I'm going to make a mark in the center of the fretboard, or center of the neck. Dude, I hate it when I drop it pretty much bang on, then I don't trust it.
All right, now it's time to carve my first neck. So I'm using a ruler to reestablish a center line across the fresh cut, and then I'm trying to get at least close to depth on one side and the other. And then I'm drawing more lines to bisect the center line with the fretboard transition, and what I'm doing is I'm just creating facets. So I'm doing essentially 2 facets per side of center, and then I eventually smooth those into each other with increasingly smaller facets, and that's what gives me my radius across the back of the fretboard. This is a pretty traditional, common method to do this, but it felt like to me the least risky way to attempt my first neck carve, so that's what I went with. If I had a spoke shave for this particular build, I probably would have used it too. But the Shinto saw rasp made quick work of it, along with a couple other rasps. And I kept, obviously the heel transition and the headstock transition. Those were the tricky ones, which required a lot of finessing and massaging. But in the end, I'm happy with the shape. But I do revisit it several times, as you'll see throughout the build. And I think I end up, thinning the neck several times off camera. And this is still like the most baseball neck you've ever felt. But somehow it's comfortable. I don't know why.
This neck is still pretty fat, but it is roughed in. And it doesn't feel terrible, it just feels a little fat. And I'm not sure about this headstock transition. This neck just feels short with the length of this heel. See what it feels like on the base. All right, here's the heel transition. Obviously, I'm gonna take that down. The sucker is starting to look real. All right, so I'm back. It's the next night, and well, I've got a lot of touch-up sanding to do and a little bit more shaping to get the neck profile the way that I want it. It feels actually really, really good, but the shoulders leading up to the fretboard edges are very square and not the way I want them. So I've got to shape those quite a bit. I want to kind of feather in this transition here where the sapele, the last little bit of sapele that meets the cherry or maple, I want to get that transition right and consistent on both sides. So I've got much more of the sapele left on this side than I do the other. So I want to fix that, and I don't really necessarily consider this a volute because it doesn't protrude up, but this transition area from the neck to the headstock, I want to push it back to where I have that pencil line, because it's just not in a good playing position. I mean, it's okay, but if I want to fret closer to the nut, it's not, well, where this volute is kind of where this transition area needs to be pushed back a little bit. The neck does feel really, really good. I'm really, really pleased with it. And furthermore, I was concerned that the neck was going to move, but it hasn't. So with my not straight edge, where's 35? Okay, so that's 35. Is it? Oh, that's weird. Huh. So the 35-inch scale is not fitting, the 34-inch scale is fitting, and I used a 35-inch scale base, or at least I thought I did, so this may be 34 inches. I'm glad I haven't set the bridge, but I did measure nut to G-string saddle position, and it was 35-inch scale, and I copied the fret positioning off of that same base. But my not straight edge doesn't fit for 35 and does fit for 34. So now I'm concerned, and I'm just now discovering that on camera. But I think that's an easy thing to overcome. But as I'm looking at this right now, the fretboard has not moved. So this neck has not moved after removing all that material. And that's something to be happy about. So I am indeed happy about that. I am indeed concerned about the scale length now. So I'm not entirely sure what I need to do, if anything. I think I'm just going to continue on and copy the positioning. One thing I can do is once I finish the neck and get the body finished out, I can figure out a way to mount the bridge and string it up and see if it intonates based on the bridge position. So yeah, if I'm within a half step either way at the 12th fret, I think the rest can be solved with just saddle positioning. So anyway, let's get on to this neck to headstock transition.
All right, so like I said, I've refined this transition several different times. This is probably the last one I'm going to show on camera, at least intentionally. But yeah, if you're looking at this headstock transition and think, wow, that looks stupid. Yep, kind of does. It's quite extreme. There's quite an elevation change between the fretboard and the headstock. I didn't want to do a scarf joint in order to achieve break angle, so I wanted to try an experiment with this. Basically, I don't know, doubled or more the traditional slope drop off from a fender style neck to, almost kind of Gibson style to achieve break angle. It works. It just looks goofy.
I'm super happy with the progress on shaping the neck. I'm still concerned about the scale length and then the fret layout. I feel like the frets are a bit janky still, and that's a cause for concern. But the profile of the back of the neck is starting to shape up. If I had to play it like this, I really wouldn't be unsatisfied. I want to spend a little bit more time refining it. Another thing I'll have to do is I'll have to thin down the heel, thickness of the heel, to get the string height right and set the break angle based on the bridge. If I set this neck in the pocket, you can see that sucker is sitting a good ½ inch above the body almost, at least an easy 3/8 of an inch. Focus. There we go. That's just too high. So I need to figure out how low I need to bring that. And I don't want to rush that because I don't want to have to shim the neck up once it's to that point. All right, let's trace out where this neck is landing.
All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm measuring how much above the body this fretboard sits on the example bass relative to the bridge. So I'm trying to create the same rise. I don't know what the term I'm looking for here is, but I want the top of the saddles in their neutral position essentially to be coplanar with the top of the fretboard. And the heel of this neck is way too thick to make that happen. So I'm taking measurements to see by how much thinner I need to make this heel. And that's what I'm doing. So I'm using my number 7 from like 1904, which is, every time I get an excuse to use this, it's just awesome because it still works so well. But I'm checking in between to make sure that I'm planing flat. My plane is dialed, the blade's not moving. So checking it with a square and then just touching up with a leveling beam just to make absolutely certain. Using pencil marks to make sure that the leveling beam is removing everything, and it's pretty good. So again, this is just a matter of going back and forth and checking to make sure that I've got it coplanar or close to it. And that's essentially what I keep going back and forth and doing, just removing a little bit. Because at this point, the last thing I want to do is have to shim this neck. So I'm just going to creep up on it and take a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch at a time. And that's what I'm going to do. So now I'm drilling holes in the neck template so that I can then make sure that they work and that they align properly, because I want the string pull during the tuning process to be in a straight line. So that's how I set up these holes. And then I poke them in the headstock itself. So just like anything else, you go halfway through from one side, preferably the back, then you flip it over and finish the hole with the brad point. So I have minimal tear out there, so I'm pretty excited with that. It would have been absolutely tragic to botch the tuner holes after all the work that I did on the fretboard. The only problem is this headstock is actually way too thick to get the tuning machines to poke all the way through. So I have to remove about an 1/8 of an inch off the back of the headstock. Again, I like to just creep up on it as slowly as I can.
All right, thank you so much for watching this episode. Join me next time as we wrap up some of the details on the body and the pickguard in preparation for the first coats of finish. And by then, we'll be wrapping this thing up. So join me next time down here in the basement.